Welcome back to the second webisode of Turn a Light On. On this episode, we are going to be talking to you about the effects and the long-term reactions of sexual abuse. As always, our goal is to help victims become survivors. We also want to shine a light on mental health issues as well. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. Um, if you or somebody you know is a victim of sexual abuse, then don't be afraid to extend a helping hand. Um, Here's the important thing to know. People react differently to sexual violence. Not all survivors are the same. Um, Not all survivors are affected the same way either, so we really need to remember that. Many think that there is a right way to feel and react. However, there is no right or wrong way to react or feel to what happened. Um, but every survivor has a story. There are They also have their own timeline of coping with sexual violence. And the thing is that it never really goes away. And here are some impacts of sexual violence and how it can affect a person. The first one is shame. Shame is really one of the hardest parts because it took me years to not feel ashamed of what happened. Now I use my experience to try to help somebody else. Survivors think that they are bad, wrong, and permanently flawed. You are not any of those things. The person who did this to you is the bad person. They knew what they were doing. They knew that it could, they knew what it could do to you, yet they still chose to do it. The second one is guilt. Um, the guilt of keeping it a secret, the guilt of possibly ruining somebody's family, the guilt of ruining a person that takes a toll on you, and survivors feel that the abuse was their fault. It is also very difficult for survivors to understand. Um, Survivors to place the blame on the person who assaulted them. Often the offender was the person who was close to them, and that they wanted to protect them. It also may be the person that by placing the blame on the offender, they could feel some happiness. The next effect is denial. So for me, I hated the word victim. I thought by admitting that I was a victim, that it would actually, then I was actually admitting what happened. And I eventually come to accept that I was a victim. And it took me a while to get to Survivor. Um, Survivor saying it wasn't that bad or it only happened once. I am fine. I don't need anything. For many, it never happens just once. Abusers will have a way of trying to make it feel like it's your fault. They get you thinking that it wasn't much of a big deal. Just knowing that, just know that it's okay to admit when you need help or you need to talk to somebody. Another effect is minimizing and boundaries. Let's talk about minimizing first. This is a very common. We minimize the issue to keep it from being a big deal. Minimizing the assault can be a coping strategy. This can include survivors thinking that their abuse was not as bad as somebody else's. Those supporting the survivor should validate the impact of the abuse, and it is appropriate that the survivor is upset, traumatized, or hurting from it. Now let's talk about boundaries. Because sexual violence is such a boundary violation, it impacts the survivor's perception of how and when to set boundaries. Survivors may be unfamiliar with boundaries. In general, they may not know that they have a right to create or reinforce boundaries. Many survivors need support in developing and practicing these boundaries, and it's not always the easiest thing right there. Next is trust. Trust is hard, especially when it has been violated. Sexual assault is a betrayal of trust. Most survivors find it difficult to trust others as well as themselves in their own perception. On the other hand, they may ta they may set an inappropriate level of trust in someone. Find may place an inappropriate level of trust in someone. The next effects are safety and isolation. Sorry, my roommate's dog is barking. um, Safety. The first of those effects we're going to talk about is safety. And survivors sense that safety has been altered. They may assess unsafe situations as safe and perceive safe situations as dangerous. It's important to explore with survivors um, what feels what feels safe, specific questions about safety. Now let's talk about isolation. This is a big issue for adult survivors. Many feel that they do not deserve support. They feel that they are tainted and that others will not want to be their friends or lovers. A survivor's culture and lack of community connections can, at times, have these feelings compound with isolation. Survivors may have been shunned or avoided by their family communities because of their disclosures. Amnesia is another effect. Um, a survivor may not remember what happened. In the long term, if the sexual assault happened before the development of language, the survivor may not have the memory that can be verbalized. The next long term effect is disassociation. A survivor may have disassociated during the sexual assault incidents, and they may describe floating up out of their body or looking over their own shoulder during their abuse. Disassociation can happen even if the survivor is not being assaulted or abused. Um, an event or memory can bring up a trigger or emotion dissociations. The next effects are I'm going to talk about now is amnesia, physical and emotional. The first I'm going to talk about is amnesia, and this is when the body is where the sexual abuse took place. Many survivors feel betrayed for bodies in various ways. They may have tried to numb, disassociate from their bodies in order to not to experience the feelings of brought on by the abuse. Sometimes it's the connections when the experience of the numbness survivors may seek out experiences and provide more intense physical sensations like self injury. Next, I want to talk about the physical effect. Survivors may have body complaints, eating disturbances, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, and the physical symptoms related to areas on the body's person. Then let's talk about the emotional effect. And for this, it may be anger, sadness, disoriented, distant, or calm. It takes an effect different. Everyone has a different effects to it. Another effect is cognitive, and survivors may be unable to block the thoughts of the assault or alternately forget the entire parts of it. They may constantly think about things that they should have done differently. Nightmares are common. Survivors also have thoughts of fantasies of being in a similar situation and mastering the traumatic event. Some more effects are eating disorders, physical changes, changes in sexuality, substance abuse, self-harm, thoughts of suicide, anger, mood disorders such as depression and PTSD. Now I want to talk briefly about some long-term reactions. Um, so the long-term reactions can include coping mechanisms which may be beneficial and adaptive or counterproductive or maladaptive. Um, but here are they. Anxiety, poor health, sense of helplessness, persistent fear, depression, mood swings, sleep disturbances, flashbacks, disassociation, panic attacks, phobias, relationship difficulties, withdrawal, isolation, paranoia, and localized pain. Um, that is it for this episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all remember, kindness matters, and don't be afraid to help someone, even if it's the littlest things.